The Los Angeles Innocent Project is stating that, among other things, that Scott Peterson did not receive a fair trial because the witnesses that claimed they saw Laci walking the family dog that day were not interviewed or not properly interviewed. But we're going to investigate that on our investigative report today. I'm Charlie, and this is Charlie Investigates.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Investigates is dedicated to examining controversial criminal cases through disciplined investigation, critical thinking, and respect for the evidence. Our goal is not to persuade listeners toward a predetermined conclusion, but to present verified facts, examine competing interpretations, identify unanswered questions, and encourage thoughtful analysis. The pursuit of truth is more important than defending any theory. All individuals described or mentioned in this presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law.
Well, hello and welcome to our Digital Investigator's Office. Come on in, have a seat as we discuss something. Well, it's getting a lot of buzz these days. You see, there are eyewitnesses to Laci walking the dog, Mackenzie, which, according to many people today, does not fit into the prosecution's timeline. But today I'm going to remind you we're not going into speculation or sensationalism, but we will investigate the facts in today's program. Now, if you like this approach to true crime, something that's not just out there for clickbaits, please do us a favor. Subscribe, like, and review. This will help us reach more people with the investigation. Also, if you'd like to share with me your thoughts as we go along with the case, then I invite you to reach out with a shout-out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We often say about that shout-out, you can ask questions. You can even make suggestions about other episodes you would like to see us cover, or in this particular case, some things you'd like for us to cover that we may not have covered yet, or you'd like for us to recover it. And also, you can lodge objections. You say, hey, I think you guys have lost your mind. It is a safe spot, so reach out with that shout-out, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com.
The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
By the way, let me take just another moment as we get into today's case. If this brings to your mind someone who may be facing domestic violence and you want to help them, we'll have them reach out to the domestic tip line. We will leave that in the show notes, or you can just Google it and you can get it right away. All right, let's get into today's program. The LAIP, that is the Los Angeles Innocent Project, they are arguing that the original investigation failed to adequately pursue a series of witnesses. Those witnesses reported seeing a woman that they believe was Laci Peterson on Christmas Eve morning. Now, the prosecution does not dispute that some of those witnesses were never interviewed by the detectives. But instead, the people argues that, many were later located and interviewed by Peterson's own investigators, and that some of them had never reported their observations to the police, and other accounts contain significant problems involving timing, location, identification, or clothing. So the question today is, which side is right? And that's what we're going to investigate. Not whether these witnesses should automatically be believed, but whether the investigators did enough to determine that they were telling the truth. You see, there is a vital part of the Scott Peterson investigation that I think deserves a much closer look. And it does involve witnesses. Not just one witness, but a number of people who reported seeing a woman they believed Laci Peterson walking Mackenzie on the morning of December the 24th. And the Los Angeles Innocent Project, they've raised this issue in their post-conviction work. Their argument, in part, is that these witnesses were not interviewed, or were not interviewed with the attention they deserved. Now, my friend, I got to tell you, that's a serious allegation. But before we accept it, I want to slow this down. Because, my friend, there is a big difference between saying the police didn't interview these witnesses and saying the police didn't investigate these witnesses. Interviewing and investigating, well, those are not necessarily the same thing. So let's get out our evidence locker. You see, our question isn't, were these witnesses right? Not yet. Not yet. Our question is, in this particular situation, did the original investigation adequately identify, interview, evaluate, and follow up on the people who reported seeing Laci, or someone they believed was Laci? That's the question we're going to investigate. Now let me put myself back into the investigator's chair for a moment. Imagine that you're working on a missing person case. The missing person is an 8-month pregnant woman. And someone tells you, I think I saw her walking her dog this morning. Now you don't have to believe that person, but you do have to take that information seriously enough to test it. You're going to ask some questions. Where were you standing? What time was it? How long did you see her? How far away were you? What was she wearing? Which direction was she walking? Did you know Laci? What makes you believe it was Laci? Could it have been somebody that looked similar? Was anybody with you? Did anybody else see her? And can we independently collaborate what you're telling us? That is, my friend, how an investigator takes a sighting and turns it into something that can either become evidence or it can be eliminated as a lead. And that is a very important distinction. Because a witness can be completely sincere and still be wrong. Human memory isn't a video camera. Let me put it this way. Put 4 people on 4 corners of an interstate. Have a collision of 2 vehicles in that very intersection. What will you get? You'll get 4 different stories. All will not see it the same way. And someone can see a pregnant woman walking a dog, believe it's Laci, and genuinely remember it that way. That is why the job isn't automatically to believe the witness, and it's not automatically to reject the witness. The job, my friend, is to test the witness. Let's have an example. Vivian Mitchell. This is one witness in particular. Now, she's important because her story presents us with a very specific investigative question. Mitchell later told a defense investigator that she had contacted the Modesto Police Department tip line after seeing a woman she believed was Laci Walker McKenzie. According to Mitchell, she gave the person answering the phone identifying information about herself, and then she described what she had seen. She says she was told somebody would get back to her, and she says that didn't happen for a long time. Now, here's where I want to be very careful. That is Mitchell's account. We have a later recorded interview in which she tells that story. We also have some other additional reporting from February 2003 in which Mitchell was publicly saying she had contacted the police and had not been contacted back. One of the news agencies reported that. But yet there's something else we do not have in our hands. We do not have the Modesto Police Department's tip record documenting that original call. We don't have it. It's not there. And that's important. Because if we're going to call ourselves an investigative podcast, we can't fill a missing document with an assumption. We have to say what we know and what we don't know. Now here's what we know about Mitchell. She says she contacted the police. She says she provided information. She says she expected a follow-up. And she says she didn't receive one. The prosecution's position also raises another issue. The people point to information investigators obtained, now get this, from Mitchell's neighbors. And her neighbors say that what they said, the police say what the neighbors said, raises question about her ability to distinguish people accurately. Now, that was what the neighbors said. The neighbors basically said to the police to talk to the neighbors of Mitchell that she has problems distinguishing people accurately. Now, that's probably good to know, but here's my question. Here's the investigator's question. I told you we're investigating the investigation. Now, if a person says they saw your missing person, I need to ask you, and I'm asking myself, why wouldn't you want to talk to that person yourself? Why would you rely on somebody else or what somebody else says about a witness when you can actually sit down with the witness and ask the questions directly? You see, that's not a conclusion that Mitchell saw Laci, but it is a question about the investigative procedures, and those are two very different things. You would think you'd want to talk to the person that saw her or said they saw her rather than the neighbors that discredited her. Let's take another witness. Grace Wolf. This is a different story. We're going to look at Grace Wolf because Wolf gives us an important counterexample. The LAIP identifies Wolf as someone whose sightings wasn't properly investigated. But the prosecution points out that Wolf apparently did not report her sighting to the police. Now, she was later located by an investigator, Gary Airmorn, who was working for Peterson's defense team. He did interview her in May of 2003, and Wolf described seeing a woman she believed was Laci. Now, think about what that means. She described a woman she believed was Laci. But if she never contacted the police about that, it's difficult to say that the police ignored a lead that they did not know existed. That's important. Because we're not here, my friend, to build a case against the police. We're here to determine what actually happened. And in Wolf's case, this question becomes different. It's no longer, why didn't the police interview her? It really is, how did the defense find her? And what exactly did she tell them? And how reliable was that account? That's a different investigative question. Another witness, Tony Friettes. And here we have a timing question. He gives us another category, because here we're dealing with a witness who was eventually interviewed. And the question isn't, was he interviewed? The question this time becomes, when was he interviewed? And by whom was he interviewed? Friettes was interviewed by Peterson's defense investigator relatively early in 2003. But think about this. The detective, Greg Gorgon, he later interviewed him in 2004. Interviewed early in 2003, prosecution's detective comes back and interviews him in 2004. that chronology matters. Because, my friend, when you're evaluating an investigation, I've got to tell you, timing really matters. A witness interviewed days or weeks after an event is giving us one kind of evidence. But a witness interviewed much later is giving us something different. Why? Memory changes. Details can become reinforced by other things you read or hear or see online or see on TV. And other information can actually enter a person's memory. So when we hear that a witness was eventually interviewed, that doesn't automatically answer the investigative question. We need to know, when was that first account given? What did it say, the first account? What changed? What stayed the same? And what did investigators do with it? Let's talk about the prosecution's argument. You see, as the investigation progressed, detectives, they developed a narrow window in which they believed Laci could have been outside walking Mackenzie. That window ran approximately 10:08 a.m. to 10:18 a.m. Now, we know, friend, that Scott's his phone, put him close to the residence at 10:08. He was not at the warehouse as early as he said he was. He thought he left at 9:30, 9:40, but the Martha Stewart part of her program that he said that he and Laci watched, that was not on till closer to 10 a.m. He could not have left at 9:30, 9:40 and watched the show. However, even though there's a very narrow window now, 10 minutes actually, here is the important distinction. The prosecution wasn't arguing that Laci was necessarily walking the dog during that 10-minute period. Their theory is that she was already dead or missing by 10:18. That's very important in realizing and seeing these witnesses that are coming forward. The 10:18 time, it comes from Karen Service, who watched the Mackenzies, found the Mackenzie's dog with the loose leash outside the Peterson home. Investigators did treat that event as a critical marker in the timeline. And once that timeline becomes central, eyewitness reports placing Laci outside after 10:18, that can become a very serious problem for the prosecution's theory. And that's when we have to ask the investigative question. And here it is. Listen carefully. Were those witnesses rejected because their observations were independently shown to be unreliable? That's one thing. Were their observations independently shown to be unreliable? Or was it because their observations did not fit a timeline that investigators had already established? See, those are very important questions, and they have very different meanings. Let me say those again. Were the witnesses rejected because their observations were independently shown to be unreliable, or were they objected because the observations did not fit a timeline that investigators had already established? Meaning is very different. Now, I want to come back in just a moment, and we're going to share with you what I think is the LAIP's strongest arguments. And we're going to share with you what I think is the prosecution's strongest arguments regarding these eyewitnesses. But now it's time for us to take a moment, as we do in our weekly podcast, and we lighten the load a little bit. We all stand back a little bit and take a breath, and we share what we call a Crazy Crook story. And in our Crazy Crook story, each week we give out our Golden Handcuff Award. And so now, my friend, it is time for just a brief moment to sit back and listen to Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook story. Well, my friend, even outside of the Peterson saga, the world of crime can get, sometimes downright goofy. And unfortunately, again, we're coming back to Florida. You know, we've got all those Florida man sightings down here in Florida. Well, this was last year. Last year in Florida, a 41-year-old man. He was working as a Chuck E. Cheese mascot. You know, you've seen that Chuck E. Cheese mascot, right? Well, this Chuck E. Cheese mascot was busted for stealing a party guest debit card. Well, my friend, birthday parties are fun for some, and birthday parties has surprises, but I'm telling you, the kids at this birthday party, they got a real surprise when police removed the giant mouse head and found the stolen card in the guy's pants pocket. Oh yeah, his story was he just found the card on the floor, planned to turn it in. But needless to say, that Chuck E. Cheese, he ended up in handcuffs. And the only thing he delivered, well, it was a lesson that you can't steal from little kids without getting caught. So our Golden Handcuff Award goes this week to the Chuck E. Cheese mascot, who ended up getting caught stealing a guest debit card. And that, my friend, is Charlie's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now just imagine being a witness to that at Chuck E. Cheese. But speaking of witnesses, the witnesses of Laci Peterson walking her dog Mackenzie, well, we're going to find that it's going to fall into different categories. You see, the LAIP is talking primarily about people who said they saw a woman who they believed to be Laci walking Mackenzie on the morning of December the 24th. Their argument is that these sightings potentially matters enormously because the prosecution's timeline, it ultimately depended on Laci being dead by approximately 10:18 a.m. We know now that the LAIP has identified approximately 10 witnesses whose accounts place Laci walking the dog at various times, including accounts that extended that beyond 10:18. But here is the important investigative distinction. They were not all simply never interviewed. The record actually appears to contain 4 different situations with these witnesses. There were 1 witnesses who were never interviewed by the Modesto police. Secondly, there were witnesses who were contacted, but that information was not pursued. Thirdly, there are witnesses whose accounts were discounted as mistaken. They were interviewed, and their discounts were mistaken. And fourth, there were witnesses who were interviewed much later, sometime after the investigation had already moved toward prosecution. Now, of these witnesses in these categories, I'm going to point out the strongest point. The prosecution's strongest point is that the prosecution can legitimately say many of these witnesses were eventually located and interviewed by Peterson's own defense investigators. And several were actually presented by the defense at the trial through testimony or exhibits. They talked about these witnesses through testimony or exhibits. They were mentioned in the trial. So to say that these witnesses were never investigated, they were. They were investigated by the defense attorney's investigators. But think about this. They were not called as eyewitnesses. Wonder why? If the defense had a real eyewitness that was credible, why did they not call them? I believe that is the prosecution's strongest point. Therefore, police didn't interview them, or the defense never knew about them. That's a real limitation of the LAIP argument. So that is, I believe, the prosecution's strongest point. Now let's talk about the LAIP's strongest point. Their counter-argument can be equally as important. Now realize, a defense investigator finding a witness months later does not establish that the original police investigation adequately pursued the lead. And if a witness that contacted the police was never personally interviewed, that does raise a legitimate investigative process question. So, we know that they had over 200 officers involved in this investigation. Then why did they not take deep dives on all the witnesses? So, let's take a moment now, and I want to show you how our program is a little different, lots of difference from lots of the programs. We're going to now take what we call our confidence scale, the Charlie Investigative Confidence Scale, to some of these strong points. Here are the claims, and here's the confidence scale. Claim: police ignored the Laci sighting witnesses. Well, my friend, I got to tell you that the confidence in that claim from the LAIP that the police ignored Laci sighting witnesses, the confidence there is low, much too broad. Much too broad. We know that they did not ignore the witnesses. That's low. Second claim: some witnesses who later claimed to have seen Laci was never personally interviewed by the Modesto detectives. Well, I got to tell you, that confidence is high. It is actually supported by the prosecution's own filing and other court materials that some of them were never personally interviewed by the detectives, the prosecution's detectives. So that confidence is high. Here's another claim: some witnesses were never reported to the police in the first place. How can you interview them if they're never reported in the first place? The confidence on that is high, The prosecution specifically says this regarding witnesses including Grace Wolf and Martha Aguilar. So that claim is high. Here's another claim: many witnesses were later investigated by Peterson's defense team. That's what the prosecution said. The defense even investigated him. Well, that confidence is high. That was documented again in the prosecution's filing and even in the LAIP materials. They were actually investigated by the defense team. Here is another one. The claim the police failed to adequately investigate all these witnesses. Were these witnesses adequately investigated? Well, I got to tell you, the confidence on this one is simply unresolved. It would require witness-by-witness comparison of the original tip, investigative notes, interview records, timings, collaboration, and the disposition. So if that's unresolved, where does that leave us in the investigation of the witnesses? Well, it leaves us to the very point where we're going to have to take this and put this back into the evidence locker. Now, why do we do that? Well, we do that because as much as I think our work on this important podcast to find the truth about the case, we have to understand that we, you, and all the podcasters and all those on YouTube, we will not resolve this. Only the courts will. Only the courts will. Just like when you take a case and you investigate it, it will not be resolved until it gets to court or there's some sort of plea. But as of August the 15th, I've got to tell you now, as of August the 15th, 2026, I would have to categorize the LAIP effort this way. As of August the 15th, the LAIP has not won any of its major innocent claims. But neither has the litigation ended. The principal new evidence petition was rejected by the County Superior Court in April of 2026. But the LAIP has said now that it's appealing that ruling to a higher court. So it is still active in now going to the higher court with the witnesses and other claims. But on the other hand, now you've had an opportunity to hear about the strength of both sides regarding the witnesses. So based on what you've heard on today's podcast, I want to ask you, what do you think? What do you think? Did they adequately investigate it and find that some of these were discredited and should not go forward? Or did they just ignore it because it didn't fit into their own timeline? What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out with a shout out. Reach me, Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. Reach out with a shout out. Now, next week, I want to invite you to join us as we're going to take another claim that the LAIP has taken. And we are going to follow up just like we have on this one. We're going to give you the facts. We're not going to give you sensationalism. We're not going to give you what we speculate. We're going to give you the facts, and you can decide for yourself. We're going to be talking about other things. There's the burglary coming up. There's the van coming up. Lots of stuff yet to cover in this investigation. So join us next week as our next podcast episode will be dropped. Make sure you have subscribed and you have hit your notification button so that you can be notified every time we drop one of these episodes. And so until this time, next time, I'm Charlie, and this is Charlie Investigates.
You've been listening to Charlie Crimebuster Investigates. You can find more Charlie Crimebuster Investigate true crime podcasts on your favorite podcast platforms. We would like to thank our hosting service, Libsyn.com. We would also like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag at Charlie Crimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts are for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. On behalf of Charlie Crimebuster and Donnie Cantwell, I'm James Buckland. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster Investigates.